Well. Come back, Braden here, and this is another video on my road to chess mastery, and another game at that. This is now game number 2 and tournament number 10. We unfortunately lost our first game, but losses happen. They're very important lessons, and you can always take something away from your losses. As one great man said, losing is learning. Anyways, let's continue into the game. I am playing with the black pieces, and I am trying to recover from the last game, and let's see how this happens. E4 and C5, this should be expected. Again, in this tournament, especially, I will be only exclusively playing the Sicilian, as this was the main thing in my repertoire. As before, I played E5, now I completely switched to C5. Usually I stick to just one thing at a time, just because when you stick to one thing, then you only have to focus on learning that one thing, and it makes things a lot easier for when you're in the middle game, especially if you're playing with the black pieces and you play specific defense. Let's continue. D4, C takes D4, and C3. So wow, we are playing against a Smith-Morra. I believe this is the first Smith-Morra we're playing against. It should be the first, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, so this is very interesting because the whole idea of C3 is after you take on C3, which I ended up doing, the whole point is white is going for an accelerated development while also going down a pawn. So if the initiative for white fizzles out, then black is up a pawn and will be better. However, these lines are very concrete for white and offer a lot of play. So it's very tricky because, well, if you are playing against this and you go into the accepted line, you have to bet that your opponent will know what they're doing. Knight takes c3. I didn't know what I was doing here, so I was just going, hey, I won a pawn. I'm happy. I will go through the desert without water for a pawn. I'm happy. Knight c6, just focusing on development. I thought that these two squares were more important to develop first, as I do want to play knight to f6, but I was worried of an e5. Now knight to c6 covers the e5 square. And after knight f3, I shared the same sentiment here. I played d6 so that I could play knight to f6 here. Now we see bishop to c4, e6. I just don't want any issues along this diagonal. I'm trying to go for the most solid approach that I can. We see castles and knight to f6. Bishop to f4, very interesting move. The whole point is after bishop f4, you are targeting this weakness, and you're hopefully trying to get in something like knight to b5, which can often be quite dangerous to see. I just played bishop to e7. I thought that this was just pretty natural, and rook to c1. Rook to c1 is a good move. Maybe also queen to b3 or something along these lines is also interesting. Unfortunately, I do not have too much experience on the white side of these positions because, well, I don't like sacrificing material. If you give me a position and sacrificing material is the best option in the position, unless it creates clear, distinct, and either initiative or counterplay, then I'm not going to play it. And to preface that, what I mean by that is in the opening. I wouldn't go for a Benko. I wouldn't play the white side of this position, not because it's bad, but because that's not in my wheelhouse of strengths. And I think especially when you're trying to compete, improve your rating, you should play to your strengths in tournament and, well, focus on improving your weaknesses outside of tournaments where rating isn't on the line. Anyways, rook to c1. I played castles, queen to e2, which I thought was a really good move. The whole point is they want to bring their rook to d1 and possibly go for an e5, where unfortunately my knight is being attacked, so I would have to take, but I wouldn't be able to take because, well, the rook is eyeing my queen. After queen to e2, I played a6. I thought this was necessary. Looking back, I'm not too sure, just because there could be some annoying pressure on the b6 square now. However, I thought this would be necessary because the whole idea here is I want to play queen to e8, something that I recalled Ben Feingold playing at some point. I wasn't too sure if it was this position or not, but I know he's played these queen e8s before, and I thought that this might be a necessary addition in this position, where after rook to d1, queen e8, and maybe I go for an e5 and bishop to e6, and I should be okay. But okay. Rook f to d1, and knight to a5 instead. I decide to go on to the side of the board and try to move this bishop to a square it wouldn't want to be. And the whole point of this move was very surprising even to me looking back on it. After bishop to d3, you don't really want to play d5, even though you can in this position. It's just not quite working. It's just ugly, because if you play d5 and takes, first off, there might even be a takes in this position, but opening the bishop against your king is not really something you'd want to do here. So tactics aside, I'm not even going to go into specifics of tactics, or nor did I look at that before the game. The whole point is d5 might even be the best move, but practically it's just very ugly to look at. Anyways, I played e5 here, and the whole point is now that bishop is not really doing too much. On d3, it's just looking at the e4 pawn. However, there's a big downside to this move, which is very surprising that I played it, but I think strategically this move can make a lot of sense. The whole point is, although we give up the d5 square, we do get control of d4 and f4, and well, at some points we may still even be threatening the move d5. Bishop to e3 and bishop to e6. Now we can see that I'm clearly going for a d5 break at some point. It's not quite working yet. The e5 pawn is undefended. Well, after d5, of course. But instead, h3, just a casual move. I ended up playing rook c8, just trying to improve my position. I think this makes a lot of sense. I'm up a pawn already, so if you really think about it, the pawn I'm up is the d6 pawn, and sure, it might be a weakness, but I'm up a pawn, and hey, if I lose the d6 pawn, maybe I can try to make sure I maximize my advantage or piece placements by the time I lose it, and then I just have a better position with equal material. So that's one important way to think about these positions is, sure, I'm down, or I'm a little bit more locked in than my opponent, but I definitely have an advantage that is with material, though it's a bit arguable to say I have an advantage otherwise, for a piece placement, that is. Rook c8. Knight takes e5 now, and this was a very interesting turn. I was not expecting knight takes e5. I don't think this works, but it has some measures of a game I played a long time ago versus Nolan, and the link to that game will be in the description. But if you remember that game, what the interesting thing was, I saw knight takes d6 and I was scared to lose an exchange. Here it's not really losing an exchange, but here you can see there's clear pressure. For example, after takes bishop b5, and it looks like my queen is nearly trapped. But the thing is, it's not quite. And whenever you see a sacrifice against you, the first thing you should do is, what if I take it? What happens if I take it? Now, there is a lot of different reasons why you can or cannot take a piece. Something called long-term compensation. Short-term compensation would just be winning back the material immediately. So it would be more of a tactic than a version of a sacrifice in the modern sense of the word, I guess. Modern terms are usually like if it's a sacrifice and you take it and somehow you win back the material in like one or two moves. It's not really a sacrifice, it's just really a tactic. But sacrifice where you get a lot of compensation and it's worth it to sacrifice, that's usually the more appropriate term in those certain situations. But knight takes e5 can definitely be considered to be more of that type of sacrifice where it does give a bit of an initiative, but that initiative really is not enough. Unfortunately, this e4 pawn also kind of just keeps this bishop hemmed in. There's no kingside attack, and my queen's perfectly fine after d takes e5. And as I mentioned before, you should really ask yourself, can you take the sacrifice? And especially at this time, and I'm pretty sure even if I were to revisit over the board chess, pretty much every sacrifice I see I'm willing to take unless it's clearly like not working or not good because of a specific tactic. I was very provocative in my play, I would say, where I want to be proved that I'm wrong, and normally I wouldn't be, so that's perfect. But bishop b5, and now we have to have some questions here. So, all right, queen to c7, not something we want to play. Queen to c7 pretty much, we can almost say is losing after knight to d5. The whole point is e7 is hanging in some cases where, unfortunately, if we go here, well, knight e7, and they win back the piece and the exchange, which would be very bad for us. However, after knight to d5 as well, if we go queen to d8, now this is just knight takes f6 with check, and we lose the queen. So now we clearly see that queen c7 doesn't work. However, a very counterintuitive move, bishop to d6, really the only move in the position. And now we can see the whole point of taking being okay is that after bishop d6, there's really nothing in the position anymore. And their bishop is under attack, so they don't have time to make any crazy moves like b4 or whatever, just because we'll probably just take and be better in the resulting position because we're up a piece and a pawn. Or sorry, just the piece because they took on e5, so that would just be up a piece. But all right, bishop d6, bishop to d3, and queen to e7. I thought it was necessary just to get out of the line. Normally when you see the queen and rook facing each other on an open line, the first thing you want to do is move that queen, because the queen's definitely more valuable than the rook. And tactics will favor the lower valued piece, I guess you would say. That's definitely how I would put it. King h1, I thought this was a very interesting move. I didn't see too much the point. I thought this even feels like it's maybe even wasting a little bit of time. And it's just unclear what their point is in this position. But it is also kind of hard to suggest a move. Maybe even bishop to b6 would be interesting, but even then that doesn't really do too much, though it does have the added bonus of covering the d8 square. Maybe king h1, yeah, actually maybe that's why, because if rook d8, then bishop to e3. Okay, I'm just realizing that now. Anyways, after king h1, I just decided, you know what? The best way to win a position when you're up a piece is to trade pieces. And I decided to play bishop c4. I thought this was a very practical and good approach, just preventing any counterplay, removing all of their pieces. Sure, this bishop on d3 is not amazing, but it's still an important piece, and it can become an important piece, especially after a move like f4 and e5. And you never even want to consider or entertain those ideas in the position, even if they're going to be bad. Just this move doesn't really take too much thought. You're trading off another piece, you're out material. Okay, you're just winning. Bishop takes c4, knight takes c4. The whole point is I might want to remaneuver this knight at some point. So I just thought it would be best to go to c4 here. Bishop g5 and knight b6. I thought knight b6 was actually necessary here. The whole point is knight d5, I can now take with the b knight. So I'm just trying to control the square, as I don't want to see any knight d5 stuff in the air. There's no reason to ever allow something like this. And again, if you can avoid counterplay, especially if you have a much better position, because it just makes your opponent more desperate to solve things. And usually, sometimes you can't solve things and you have to sit and grovel in your position, but that's very hard for people to do. Now we see a4. I played bishop to b4. Again, you can see clearly what I'm trying to do. Trying to trade off this piece. The more pieces come off, the more prevalent the advantage becomes. Knight to d5. Knight takes, e takes, and rook takes c1. As you can see, I'm pretty much just trading the house. And after queen to d6, just blockading. This has gone pretty successful for me. Now, again, I'm just up this free, actually maybe the knight, because, you know, we have the same dark squared bishops, but I'm just up a free knight, and this should be very straightforward. Bishop g5, Bishop c5, I'm just trying to remaneuver it onto this diagonal. I thought that would be better, and I still hold that sentiment. Queen c2, but also there's another idea. Bishop d4, and the whole point is, well, it's just a remaneuver to win the pawn. But this diagonal in general is very strong for this piece. f4, so the whole point is, if I take on d5 in any way, there might be some counterplay. It's not something you'd want to allow. For example, takes, and maybe a queen to d2 or something here. Even though you have bishop takes b2, like it's just not something you'd want to allow. There's no reason to allow this at all, because sure, you're up 2 pawns, but you're only up 2 pawns, and there's a lot more room for error. So this is definitely not something you'd want to go into. And after f4, the straightforward move I saw was just h6, forcing either trade or retreat, where after retreating, we just play bishop a7 and threaten to take on f4, but they take on e5. But even then, trading these central pawns also limits their ability to create counterplay. As we see here, g5. It's important not to play rook to d8. Rook to d8 looks natural, but queen to c7 may cause some problems here. And well, unfortunately, this cannot be taken. So it is a little bit scary here, but just as long as we avoid rook d8 with g5 and now queen to c5, we will be okay. The whole point of this is, well, okay, if bishop to f2, things are a lot more simple because take and rook to d8, and we're going to be taking this pawn quite easily. If queen to b6, rook to d7, again, no issues. But after g6, d6 and g5, bishop e1, the whole point is that I have this move queen c5, which threatens a checkmate, while also threatening to trade queens. And I wasn't trying to go for any uber accurate queen to e3s. I was just focused on, hey, you know what? I can trade queens here. I can pretty much remove any counterplay in this position. And after b4, bishop a7, h4, rook d8, this pawn's just lost, and this was the only source of counterplay my opponent had left. H takes, bishop c3, but unfortunately, there's a nice move that pretty much trades everything else off the board, knight e4. And knight f2 is coming, either winning well, not winning, but just trading another piece for another piece, or just allowing knight f2, which would also be pretty bad. Bishop d4, but unfortunately, this loses a piece due to rook takes d6. And if bishop takes a7, then I can take on d1, and that's even more material. But we see rook to c1, I take b5, and here's a nice tactic to force the trade of the remaining pieces on the board. Rook d1 check, forcing the rook to go to the d file, where knight f2 will be able to pick the piece up. I was originally thinking if I could play knight to f2, but I thought that this would be a lot easier because knight f2, king h2, and rook d1, the rook can move. And if you can trade off every piece when you're up 2 minor pieces, well, this is going to be a win, even if all the pawns and pieces were off the board. Well, all the pawns, not the pieces. I need the bishop and knight. And as we know from a previous game, I know how to win this position. I was very, very lucky to have it once, and I wouldn't be afraid to have it again, because if you can do it once, you can likely do it again. That was my my thought process here. But okay, of course, I'm not going to make it too difficult on myself. There's no reason to go into that voluntarily, as that can cause problems. This is a nice idea here. The whole point is if king takes c6, then just a4 and the pawn promotes. Now we'll just see how the game progresses. And I just forced the promotion. Queen to b2. Important not to play knight to d3. Very tempting, but that's a stalemate. So that would be bad. But after king d1, queen c2, knight d3, and queen to f2, the game ended in checkmate, and I ended up winning my second game. I am now 1 out of 2, and I have 3 more games to go for this tournament. And I promise things are going to be picking up quite fast in the next few games. So I hope you enjoyed, and well, I'll see you then. Bye.